Hello, it's your boy Dre, and training camp is finally here, which means it's officially time to start separating real roster storylines from pure offseason noise. And today we've got one that I genuinely cannot stop thinking about because a prediction just dropped that has the Chicago Bears pulling off a legitimate blockbuster trade this season right in the middle of the year for one of the most dominant, most underrated running backs in the entire league. We're talking about Jonathan Taylor potentially landing in Chicago. So let's break this whole thing down because there's actual roster logic behind this. There's real contract situations driving it. And honestly, the more you dig into it, the more this stops sounding like pure fantasy and starts sounding like something that could genuinely happen if the right dominoes fall the right way. Let's set the scene first because context matters here more than anything. The calendar has officially flipped to July, which means Chicago is heading back to their facility for the start of training camp this month, kicking off the real lead up to the regular season. This is the exact window where fans and analysts across this league start actually evaluating rosters with fresh eyes instead of just recycling offseason grades from back in March. And one position that appears to be completely locked down and settled heading into this camp is the running back room. Thanks to a genuinely dynamic pairing that combined for an incredibly impressive 1,870 rushing yards and 14 total touchdowns last season. Dre's personal opinion, those are legitimately fantastic combined numbers for a two-back rotation, and it's exactly the kind of complementary skill set pairing that a lot of coaching staffs around this league dream about having. One guy brings the pure explosiveness and receiving ability. The other brings the physical, downhill, punishing running style. On paper, heading into camp, this looks like a settled, productive position group with zero drama attached to it. But here's the twist that makes this whole story worth talking about, even with that kind of settled, productive tandem already in place. There's reportedly a real possibility that this front office could still go out and make a significant franchise-altering upgrade at this exact position later in the season. And that's genuinely fascinating to think through because it's not a story about a team with a glaring hole desperately needing to fix something broken. This is a story about a team that's already pretty happy with what they've got, potentially deciding to go get even more dangerous if the right opportunity presents itself. That's a completely different kind of aggressive move than what we normally talk about in this league, and I think that's exactly why this specific prediction has caught so much attention. So let's get into the actual prediction itself, because a well-known national analyst who covers this league recently put out a full list of bold predictions for the upcoming season. And buried right in that list is a genuinely detailed, thought-out scenario involving Chicago making a huge trade with Indianapolis to land Jonathan Taylor. Step by step, because it's not just, hey, wouldn't this be cool? It's actually built on real specific circumstances surrounding both franchises. Here's the foundation of the whole argument on the Indianapolis side of things. Reportedly, Taylor is entering the final year of his current contract, which is already a massive factor on its own given how brutal this league is on running backs physically and how rarely they make it deep enough into their careers to even be in position for a lucrative third contract. On top of that expiring deal, reportedly, Indianapolis currently has serious money already committed elsewhere on their roster, including significant investment tied up in their starting quarterback and one of their receiving options. Dre's personal opinion, when you stack an expiring contract for your star running back on top of major financial commitments already locked in elsewhere, that creates exactly the kind of budgetary pressure that forces front offices to make hard, unsentimental decisions about who actually stays and who potentially gets moved. And then there's the organizational uncertainty layered on top of all that financial pressure. Reportedly, this Colts team is teetering right on the edge of a potential rebuild, which means if things start going sideways early in the season, this isn't necessarily a front office that's going to stubbornly ride out a bad year just for the sake of loyalty to a veteran star. According to the actual reasoning laid out in this prediction, if Indianapolis comes out of the gate slow and starts genuinely considering some kind of organizational change midseason, that's precisely the scenario that would put Taylor squarely on the trade market, drawing real interest from around the league. Now, here's a detail from this specific breakdown that I think deserves a lot more attention because it directly addresses a concern I've heard floating around about this whole idea, the worry that maybe Taylor's absolute peak level of dominance is already behind him. According to the reasoning here, his start to last season proved he genuinely still has legitimate best running back in the league type potential remaining in his legs, especially if his overall workload and total touches get managed more carefully going forward. Dre's personal opinion, that's a really important nuance because it's not just saying he's still good enough to be a solid starter somewhere. It's making the case that with smarter usage, not necessarily fewer opportunities, just more intelligent deployment of those opportunities, this guy still has legitimate elite top of the league ceiling remaining in that tank. That's a completely different value proposition than just adding a serviceable veteran rental. That's adding a guy who, under the right circumstances, could be the single best player at his position in the entire league for however long you have him. And here's exactly the type of team this prediction says would be the ideal fit for exactly that kind of rental scenario. A playoff aspiring roster that already has viable, legitimate change of pace type backs in the building, but that lacks one truly dominant workhorse caliber starter to anchor the whole operation. Dre's personal opinion, that description lines up almost perfectly with Chicago's current situation, which is exactly why this specific matchup makes so much sense as a hypothetical instead of feeling like a completely random guess. And there's an even more interesting wrinkle buried in this prediction too, reportedly, if Taylor performs well during that rental stretch. The idea is that the acquiring team could then turn around and offer him the type of shorter, pay-as-you-go extension that veteran running backs often get on their third contract once they've already proven they can still perform at a high level. Dre's personal opinion, that's actually a really smart, modern way to structure a deal like this. You're not committing big, long-term guaranteed money to a running back purely on projection. You're essentially trying him out for half a season first, letting him prove it on the field, and then deciding whether he's earned a legitimate multi-year commitment. That's exactly the kind of value-conscious approach that smart front offices have shifted toward at this specific position over the last several years around this league. Now let's talk about why this same analyst isn't fully convinced the current backfield tandem is enough on its own to push this offense over the top, because I think this part of the reasoning is honestly pretty fair, even if it might sting a little for fans of the current duo. According to the breakdown, one of the two current backs put together a genuinely strong season, but he's reportedly dealt with reliability and injury concerns for a large chunk of his overall career, even if last season specifically went smoothly for him. And the other back, reportedly a likable physical downhill runner, gets described as not really being built to handle much more than around 10 or so carries a game as his primary role. Dre's personal opinion on both of those specific critiques, I actually think there's real validity here, even though I do want to push back just slightly on some of the framing. Yes, durability has genuinely been a swing factor across this one player's career at different points, so it's a completely fair thing for an analyst to flag as an ongoing risk heading into a contract year, even coming off a strong, healthy season. And when it comes to that carry count ceiling on the other back, I do think a young, ascending player like that could probably handle a slightly heavier workload than 10 carries a game if a coaching staff really needed him to carry more of the load in a pinch, but taken together as a tandem rather than evaluating each guy individually. I do think the underlying point holds up reasonably well. As good as this pairing has been, neither one of these two backs is quite the type of true bell cow field-tilting workhorse that can single-handedly change the entire ceiling of an offense in a signature playoff moment. And that leads directly into what I think is genuinely the most interesting part of this whole prediction. Because according to the reasoning laid out here, the real trigger for this potential trade isn't Chicago's offense struggling or needing to be fixed. It's the exact opposite. If this offense fully coalesces into a legitimate top 5 unit in this league, which according to the analysis is genuinely possible given how strong this team finished last season, that's reportedly exactly when this front office might start actively fishing around at the trade deadline for one more true difference-making piece. Specifically a field-tilting running back who could give an already great offense an even sharper additional edge heading into a real playoff push. Dre's personal opinion, that is such a fascinating and honestly refreshing way to think about roster building compared to how most fans typically frame trade deadline moves. Most of the time, when we talk about a team being aggressive at the deadline, we're talking about a desperate team trying to patch an obvious hole before it sinks their whole season. This is describing something completely different, a genuinely good team. One that's already performing at a top 5 level, deciding to get even more dangerous purely because they can, purely because the opportunity happens to present itself at exactly the right moment. That's the kind of aggressive, forward-thinking front office mentality that turns good teams into legitimate championship contenders. because instead of just being satisfied with we're already pretty good, they're actively hunting for that one extra piece that turns pretty good into genuinely scary. Now let's actually talk trade compensation, because this is where things get really interesting, and reportedly there's a really useful concrete blueprint we can look at from a previous genuinely comparable trade in this league's recent history. Reportedly, when a different star running back got traded from one franchise to another a couple seasons back, a deal that sent a truly elite, game-breaking back from a rebuilding type roster to a legitimate championship contender, the compensation package that the rebuilding team received back included a second-round pick, a third-round pick, and a fourth-round pick in that year's draft class, along with an additional fourth-round pick in the following year's draft as well. Dre's personal opinion, that is genuinely useful real-world context for thinking through what a Taylor package might actually look like, because it shows you exactly how a truly elite, still productive running back gets valued on the trade market, even without changing hands at the very top of the draft in a first-round pick. If that specific deal is genuinely the blueprint being used here, then Dre's personal opinion is that a realistic Taylor package likely lands somewhere in a similar range, a healthy combination of a couple mid-round picks, probably centered around that second and third round range, without necessarily requiring a full first-round selection to get a deal like this done. And honestly, that makes complete sense when you think about why that specific previous trade turned out the way it did. In both scenarios, you're talking about a genuinely elite, still productive workhorse back who's on an expiring or soon to be expiring contract being moved by a franchise that's shifting its organizational timeline to a contending team that's specifically betting on a shorter rental style window rather than a decade-long commitment. That's a very specific type of trade archetype in this league, and it tends to get valued in a pretty consistent range historically rather than swinging wildly team to team. Now let's think through exactly how a move like this would actually reshape Chicago's offense if it genuinely happened, because I think this is where the real excitement lives for anybody rooting for this team. You're not talking about replacing an already productive tandem outright. You're talking about layering a true elite workhorse talent directly into a scheme that reportedly already led the entire league in rushing success rate last season, thanks to genuinely excellent offensive line play and sharp, disciplined scheming from this coaching staff. Dre's personal opinion, adding a home run hitting talent like this into a line and scheme that's already generating consistent explosive opportunities isn't just addition, it's straight up multiplication. When the infrastructure is already elite and you drop in a genuinely elite top-tier talent to actually finish off those opportunities at an even higher hit rate. That's exactly the type of move that can take a great rushing attack and turn it into an absolutely terrifying one heading into a playoff run. And I think it's also worth talking through what this would actually do to the existing rotation rather than assuming somebody just gets completely phased out entirely. Realistically, in a scenario where this trade goes through, you'd probably see the newly acquired workhorse take over as the clear-cut lead back, likely soaking up the bulk of the early down and short yardage workload, while the existing rotational pieces shift into more clearly defined complementary roles, change of pace duty, specific passing down packages, that kind of thing. Dre's personal opinion, that's honestly a healthier, more sustainable workload distribution for basically everybody involved rather than trying to force one single back to carry an overwhelming injury, inviting workload all by himself across a full 16 or 17 game slate, spreading touches intelligently across a genuinely talented three-man rotation. Rather than leaning too hard on any single piece is exactly the kind of depth-conscious roster construction that tends to hold up better across a full season, especially heading into a real playoff push where fresh legs in December and January matter enormously. Now, I do want to address the elephant in the room here because I know some of y'all watching this are going to be skeptical, and honestly, a healthy amount of skepticism is completely fair when we're talking about a bold prediction dropped in the middle of the offseason before a single regular season snap has even been played. This entire scenario is built on a chain of specific things all needing to line up correctly. Indianapolis needs to actually start slow enough to genuinely consider a full organizational reset. Their front office needs to actually be willing to trade away a proven star rather than just riding out a rough year hoping things turn around. And Chicago's offense needs to be performing at a genuinely elite level themselves. Specifically so, this front office feels comfortable being aggressive and adding proven talent rather than pivoting toward the draft to build for the future. That's a lot of dominoes that all have to fall in a very specific direction for this exact trade to actually materialize by the deadline. But Dre's personal opinion on all of that uncertainty, that's honestly what makes trade deadline speculation so much fun to dig into in the first place. Nobody's claiming this is a guaranteed done deal transaction. This is a genuinely well-reasoned hypothetical built on real contract situations, real roster construction philosophy, and a real historical trade blueprint that shows exactly how a deal like this could realistically get valued if it does happen. Even if it never actually materializes into an actual trade call getting made in October or November, walking through the full reasoning behind it tells you a ton about both of these organizations, about how modern front offices are thinking about roster construction at the running back position specifically, and about exactly what separates a team that's satisfied with pretty good from a team that's actively hunting for that one extra piece that pushes them into legitimate championship contention. So here's what I want to know from you, Dre Talk Sports fan. And I read every single comment down there, so don't hold back on me. Do you genuinely believe this front office pulls the trigger on a blockbuster move like this if the opportunity actually presents itself at the deadline? Or do you think they stay completely comfortable riding with the tandem they've already got in the building right now? Do you buy into the idea that Indianapolis is genuinely positioned to consider moving on from a player of this caliber if their season starts going sideways? Or do you think they end up riding it out no matter how rough that opening schedule stretch turns out to be? And most importantly, if this trade actually does happen exactly the way it's being described here, layered on top of an offense that's already this efficient running the football, do you think that's genuinely